in the fitness industry, I think there's two ends of the spectrum. There's the bro science kind of, it worked for me, so it could work for you, or this is how the pros train, so this is how you should train, things like that. And then we got the quote unquote science guys, the evidence-based, but the problem with those guys, in my opinion, is that they're too dismissive of too many things. So for example, I recently did a video where I talked about meal frequency and a couple of the studies. And most of these, quote unquote, science guys would just kind of say, oh, well, meal frequency is irrelevant completely. Doesn't matter. Just like you were saying with the post-workout protein, how, it does matter, just maybe not to a significant degree, or maybe not to a large degree. But so these guys will just completely dismiss it because it's a small amount. And then these guys will say, without it, you're going to die and lose your muscle. I like the fact that you're like right in the middle. And so that's probably what the main reason was for me to really like enjoy reading your stuff. And so that's why I thought it'd be cool to get you on the podcast. Also, because there is a topic that I particularly want to know about or get your opinion on. So I figured we make an episode on it. And so I wanted to talk to you about fasted, not cardio, but actually weight training. And me personally, I just feel better when I'm training fasted. I'm even stronger when I'm training fasted, as I used to train fed. I know that that's not typical. I know that most guys aren't going to experience that. So I guess
if I have like grams of carbs before I train, like 30 minutes before I train, I generally am going to just be a little bit stronger. And it's just, and most people that I've worked with have that experience. But then I have come across quite a few people like you that not only enjoy fast lifting more, but they're stronger as well. So
I think a lot of it has to do with training as soon as I wake up. So typically I'll get up and I'll go, I'll get ready and I'll go straight to the gym. And my diets are typically really high carb. So even right now while I'm cutting, I'm on like 350 grams of carbs a day. And so, I'm eating late into the night because I'm not really worried about, eating past a certain time. So I think it's, it's not a big deal that I'm not consuming something right before I train. But again,
also, I mean, some people's bodies, and I think there's a bit of research that shows that this is an adaptation that occurs where your body gets better at conserving glycogen, and using and conserving glycogen. Basically, it learns to use it more efficiently when you're training fasted. So, to be fair, I've been training fasted for quite some time now. So if I were to, I should probably try it just for fun. If I were to start eating carbs again before, I may not notice much of a difference anymore because my body has adapted so well to it. And, it's essentially when you're training fed and you have carbs and you have glucose in your system, your body can be inefficient in a sense with its burning of that fuel because it has a surplus of it. But when you're training fasted, and it really, especially with heavy weightlifting, that anaerobic type of activity, it has to pull heavily on glycogen stores, but without kind of bonking, without running out. So that is something that, again, I've written about it. There's a bit of research on it. So that would be probably the simplest explanation.
Yeah. So let me ask you this then, just for the listeners, if someone out there who is trying to build muscle, but kind of like me, they just don't want to eat breakfast. They don't like breakfast. Maybe they're not hungry in the morning.
Or they just like to save their calories for later.
Sure. Would you say that there is any benefit at all to training fasted if the goal is to build size?
There's one study that showed that basically the post-workout like anabolic response to training, train fasted, eat food to eat protein, was higher in the fasted group than fed. That's one paper I've seen. And it's not like the effects were huge, but they were enough to be statistically significant. So, I mean, there's that. which is, I wouldn't say that, you know, I don't use it as a selling point necessarily to be like, that's why you should train fast. Some people do, they'll just grab onto that. But that's more marketing. That's more them trying to sell their special way of doing things. You know what I mean? So I would say it is valid. But more importantly, there's no downside if, like in your case, as long as you're not losing a significant amount of strength or muscle endurance, then there's no downside to it. Now, if a person were to be losing quite a bit of strength, their body just didn't adapt in the way that yours has, probably mine has. Again, I'd have to try it out to really know. But then of course it would be detrimental, because the whole point, like, you know, especially when you're wanting to build muscle, so you're in a slight calorie surplus, at least most days of the week, and you're really trying to push for more reps and more weight. That is the goal. So, you know, if eating carbs before you train it helps you in that goal, then that would be the way to do it. But I would say, again, working with a lot of people, now that I think about it, I can't think of too many cases where somebody goes, okay, I generally I'm stronger, I have more muscle endurance, you know, eating carbs before I train. But more in your condition, we're like, okay, now let's try fasted training, not just for like 2 weeks and be like, of course, when you switch in the beginning, you are going to be weaker. Like, you can pretty much count on that. Most people at least. But no, let's give it, you know, 3 months. So let's give it 4 months or 5 months. And then also let's make sure that your carb intake is generally high, so you're not training on, you know, just glycogen depleted muscles as it is. So, you know, that is, you know, something that a person, I think they'd have to try it, and they have to see how their body responds. So given that, I would say that I don't know of any other real benefits.
Yeah, and I don't like to use myself either when I talk to people about fasted training. I don't like to use myself as the example, because, you know, I'm the guy who was prepping for powerlifting meets, you know, high frequency, you know, squatting 3 times a week, super heavy, you know, 85% and beyond, in a fasted state, and I was getting stronger. And I know that that's typically not going to work for most people, but then again, there's going to be the outliers, or, you know, the guys who just,
I mean, you can definitely get stronger. People listening, like, you should know that you can. There's no question that you can build muscle and get stronger training fasted. Again, I think the only, like in your case with your powerlifting, the only reason for you to switch would have been if, despite doing it for months and giving your body time to adapt to it, you go back to eating carbs, you know, before you train, and you all of a sudden are adding 10 pounds to the bar. Well, then of course, I mean, that's a reason to have carbs before you train. But, you know, if that weren't the case, which it's not in your case, then yeah, absolutely. And I also do personally like the feeling of training fasted, and that's worth something. I mean, just in enjoyment of workouts in general is worth something. It's something that's kind of dismissed, I think, by, I mean, I guess going back to what you were saying in some of the more kind of act like militant evidence-based type people, that where you get into nitpicking on what is the absolute best way to do this, to build muscle, or to something regarding training. But let's just say that let's say that we did isolate, like we go, this is the best workout we can ever come up with, right? However long that takes from now. But if it's something that you hate doing, if you have to sit in the gym for 2 hours and you have to beat the shit out of yourself, let's just say that's what it was, then that I will take something that is 80% effective, but, you know, 200% more enjoyable. So that was something that I kind of learned along the way. It was nice to previously in the past go from these long marathon weightlifting sessions to being in the gym for 45 and maybe about an hour, probably the normal type of workout, and not doing these really high rep burnout all the time, where everything is on fire and you leave the gym, you're just dragging your ass out of the gym, as opposed to doing a lot more heavy weightlifting, which was hard, but I would leave my workouts feeling energized and feeling good, where then every day I look forward to it. So even little things, if you enjoy training fasted more, then that is a reason to do it, because it's going to help with compliance, which really, I mean, that's being the persistence and patience are two huge parts of getting to where you want to be.
Yeah, for sure. And, it's funny because I have a video where I talk about that, how, a lot of the time people want to ask, what's the best workout routine or program or whatever. It really comes down to what's the best workout routine for you. Because like you said, if you're not enjoying this program, and I know someone personally, for example, who does powerlifting, and the way he was training before was not quote unquote optimal, but he was making great progress. And then he saw me and my buddies doing, DUP, and we're making great gains. And on paper, obviously, our training style was better. But when he started applying it, he was deloading every other week. He was missing workouts. He was feeling shitty, and it just didn't work for him. So you can't just say, what's the best workout routine and then expect someone to say, hey, this is the best one and this is going to work for you, because it just doesn't work that way. But
yeah, I totally agree. I think it's the same thing with dieting too. And then there's the best diet is the one you're going to stick to. And then I would amend that, and I would say that follows, at least it needs to follow certain principles. And the same thing with training. I mean, if we're going to talk about optimal, you should be focusing on heavy compound weightlifting. Your weekly volume should be in a certain range. Frequency can be played with on how you get there, but they're very flexible principles. So dieting has the same thing. So to that point is, there are certain weightlifting programs that are just nonsensical, and you know what I mean? Like unless that was the only thing you enjoyed doing, I'd say to somebody, all right, let's not do that. Here's a group. Here's a look over here. What about one of these 5 types of programs? Same thing with dieting. There are certain things that are just completely just rubbish, but don't do those. But let's look over here and pick from one of these that at least is based on something that is going to give you, let's say, 80% of what you're looking for.
Yeah, and like you were saying, I think it's based on principles, even, because we could take, for example, an upper lower versus just a regular quote unquote bro split. But if this guy enjoys the bro split more and there's progression, because obviously you have to have progression, then that guy's going to make better results on the bro split than he would on the upper lower. If he just went in there and hated doing upper lower or whatever, and for whatever reason,
just going through the motions and just want to get out of the gym.
100%. So, all right. So we talked about the pros, if any, of fasted training if you're trying to build size. So that's obviously not something people typically will do. But what they will do is say, okay, well, now that I'm cutting, I'm trying to lose fat, maybe there's a benefit to fasted training then. What's your take on benefits for training fasted? And again, we're talking about weight training if you're trying to lose weight or burn fat.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I've written a few articles on this and linked a lot of scientific research in there. So, if people listening, if they want to dive into that, I would just go to muscleforlife.com and search for fasted. And then, so I'm just going to kind of give an overview, but if you want to get into the details, it's in the article. But there's definitely evidence that fat oxidation rates are higher, which meaning that you burn more fat in your workouts, in your fasted workouts than your fed workouts. There's some research that shows that this can be the other way around with women. And it's hard to say that, like, in working with women, it's hard to know if that's really the case with one woman versus another, but that is just something to keep in mind because women's bodies do oxidize fats differently than men's. However, I think the biggest benefit of fasted training when you're cutting is not so much the little bit of fat loss boost that you get when you're training, because of course energy balance still dictates, total net fat loss. You can't hack energy balance. You can't lose more fat given your food intake. Or let's say you can't lose, well, see, and this is where, because your body, given you have energy that you're eating, you have energy that you're burning, and a certain percentage of that energy you're burning is coming from fat, a certain percentage is coming from carbs that you're eating, and glycogen in your muscles and glycogen in your liver, and hopefully a very small amount would be coming from muscle. So given that, if you can weight that, if you can bump up the amount a little bit, the amount of energy burned from fat, and as opposed to carbs and glycogen, there's a small benefit there. but I wouldn't say that's like a strong selling point on fasted training, that alone. What I like most about it is there's research that shows that the blood flow is increased in the abdominal region when you're training fasted, which, you know, coming to this stubborn fat type of, I mean, that's kind of like the buzzword for it, but it's actually a good name for it, because it is stubborn in that there are fat cells have receptors for adrenaline, noradrenaline, and other, you know, chemicals in the body that cause it to release the energy so we can burn it. And there are receptors that are, when these chemicals bind, it releases the energy in the fat store. And there are receptors, and there's two groups, alpha and beta receptors is what they're called. The beta receptors are the good ones for fat loss, and the alpha receptors are bad in that they hinder it. So it in a sense, it'll eat that, it'll bind with that adrenaline molecule, but it doesn't release fat stores, or the energy in the fat store, so we can burn it and shrink it. So stubborn fat is basically fat. Those are fat stores that have large amounts of alpha receptors as opposed to beta receptors. So in guys, that's lower abs. It's really, it's that whole area. You know what I mean? The tire region, right? And in girls, it's generally the hips and thighs and butt. So as you get leaner, as a guy, let's say you're at 10% body fat or 11 or whatever. As a girl, you're around 20. If you want to get really lean, you're dealing with a lot of stubborn fat at this point. You know, and this, everybody has experienced this. Let's say as a guy, you start your cut at 15, 16%, and you see maybe your face gets lean quickly, your arms, your shoulders, your chest, but you don't see much of a change in your stomach yet. And that, when you get down to that 10% range, now you're looking good. You have some abs. You want to look really sharp. You want to look really lean. Now it can be a pain in the ass to go from, it is much just more difficult to go from, you know, 10% to 7% than it is to go from even 20% to 10%, given, you know, whatever in ranges plus minus 1% or whatever. So I like fasted training for that reason, that it is great for losing stubborn fat faster. And especially, and this is where I think you can really get more from your fasted training than your fed, is with supplementation. Simple would be caffeine, obviously, because it just increases adrenaline or noradrenaline levels, which means you're going to burn more energy and you have more chemicals in your blood that can mobilize fat stores. And then yohimbine is a great supplement that you have to be fasted for, because if your insulin levels are elevated, it negates its fat burning effects. And yohimbine is particularly good for losing stubborn fat faster, because it blocks the activity of, it's a stimulant. So one, you're going to burn a little bit more energy, but also it blocks the activity of those alpha receptors. So basically it helps your body burn that stubborn fat faster. So you have this combination of factors where you have more blood flow to the regions that you need to be, that's where the majority of your fat is left that you need to lose. Or at least a large percentage of it, or a good amount of it, because I mean, blood flow alone, your body to deliver the chemicals are called catecholamines, like adrenaline, noradrenaline, that mobilize fat stores. We need blood flow. So if a region of your body, if the fat isn't getting much blood flow, you can't mobilize it to any significant degree. So you have this combination of increased blood flow, and you burn a bit more fat during your workouts as opposed to carbs, you know, whether it's glucose or glycogen. And when you combine it with supplementation, you can lose stubborn fat faster. And, you know, so for those reasons, if I'm cutting, I train fasted anyway, but even in the past when I used to train fed, like I would train fed while I'm bulking, and then I would flip to fasted when I was cutting, and add, not just caffeine and yohimbine, but also synephrine, which works synergistically with caffeine, kind of like almost like a natural ECA type of stack, which is basically, that's one of my fat loss products. Phoenix it doesn't have caffeine, but it has, instead of ephedrine, it's synephrine, which is a natural, it's similar to ephedrine, but it's natural. And it has some other things to kind of replicate that ECA type of stack effect. And so that's why, I generally recommend fasted training for when people are cutting, because I haven't seen, obviously, there is no research that it can bear out exactly what I'm saying. You know what I mean? Where we have these conditions versus fed with no supplementation. But I've worked with a lot of people. I mean, I've seen it myself many times with my body, but I've worked with a lot of people now. And I think I'm comfortable saying, and this is kind of what I tell people, that if from fed training with no supplementation to fasted training with supplementation, the right supplementation, I think it's reasonable to say that you can lose fat about 50% faster, meaning if you can lose 1 pound of fat a week and you implement these strategies, let's say 30 to 50%. So you're going to lose 1.3 to 1.5 pounds a week. And I've seen that many, many times where, like, working with people and they keep spreadsheets and things. So I wouldn't say that's not, it's not scientific evidence, but I'm not just making up out of nothing. You know what I mean? And
Right.
that to me, that's worth it, especially when you're lean and you want to get really lean and it's just a grind where, let's say you're losing it. For me personally, it's hard for me to lose more than without, because I've done it both ways. I've done it fed with, I've gotten lean, very lean with fed training, no supplementation, fast training. I've done it multiple times. So it's hard for me to lose more than maybe about 0.5 pound a week if I'm going from that 10% to the 7% or 6% or whatever, with fed, no supplementation, and closer to 1 pound a week with
And we're talking about all things equal: calories, macros.
Yeah, I mean, because I know my body's ranges. Like, my maintenance is around 3,000 calories, maybe a little bit less. So when I was bulking, it was about 3,400, and over time I had to increase it, of course. So I think I ended my bulk at about 3,900 to just continue, because you just hit those where you're just not gaining weight anymore, given the food and you have to eat more. So then initially, of course, my cut was I went back to about 3,000 and got a couple weeks out of that. But then I had my real cutting kind of calories begin around 2,500. And then, over the course of 10 to 12 weeks, I'm ending around 2,000. Maybe I went I'll go as low as 1,900, but that's really just kind of the last week or so. And in terms of protein, it's always, about 1 gram to 1.2 grams per pound, which that high intake is particularly good when you are lean and muscular and you want to preserve as much of that muscle as possible. And like you, I stay high carb because I don't see any reason to eat a high fat diet period at all. I mean, your body, in terms of health needs, if you're eating around, let's say 0.3 grams per pound of fat-free mass, that's plenty for your body's health needs, for hormones, for cellular health, regeneration, skin, hair, blah, blah, blah. So beyond that, there's no purpose really that high fat serves for weightlifting, whereas high carb is great for us because it keeps our glycogen levels high, keeps our energy levels high, it keeps our workouts intense, which is also an important part of maintaining muscle when you're cutting, especially when you're lean. As you know, and you're getting really lean, being able to preserve your strength is a huge part, and keep that progressive tension on. I mean, I've had many times where when I start cutting, I'll still gain strength for the first 3 or 4 weeks, meaning I'll gain reps. I mean, I'm not like adding weight every week, but I'm still progressing. And then around the 4th week, generally for my body, is where I kind of stall. But I don't lose, like, maybe from week, let's say 4 to 5 to the end of the cut, I might lose, by the end, I might have come down back a rep or two. But I'm not losing 25 pounds in the bar or anything like that.
Yeah, for sure. So real quick, going back to supplementation for fasted training. And I think I've heard you touch on this topic a little bit on other podcasts, but what's your take on, because for me personally, especially when I'm cutting and I'm in a deep deficit, I like to sip on BCAAs during my workout.
Mm-hmm.
What's your take on branched chain amino acid supplementation specifically for people who are going to be training fasted, and maybe even more specifically for people who are cutting?
Yeah, sure. So the one downside to fasted training that we haven't really talked about yet is that muscle degradation rates are higher. Basically, you have more muscle breakdown or more muscle protein breakdown when you're training fasted than if you're training fed. And the reason why that sounds bad and scary, but I mean, of course, what you're doing when you're training is damaging muscle protein. So it's not that it's bad per se, but when we look at muscle, the muscle that you have, and whether you're going to gain muscle or lose muscle, you have on one side, you'd say, we've got a scale here. One side, you have protein synthesis. You have the creation of new muscle proteins. And then on the other side, you have protein breakdown, and the net balance between those two determines the change in your physique. So you could have, let's say your protein synthesis rates were very high. Let's say you're in a calorie surplus. Let's say you're on testosterone, whatever. I mean, it'd be hard to lose muscle if you're on, if you're injecting testosterone. But let's just say that you're doing many things that to elevate protein synthesis rates, but for whatever reason, protein degradation rates are also very, very high. Through overtraining or through very, very high stress. Maybe your cortisol levels are out the roof, you're not sleeping, blah, blah, blah. You can be in a situation where you're not going to really gain much muscle. You might even lose muscle despite doing all these other things correctly. So when we're cutting, there's research that shows that protein synthesis rates are just lower when you're in a calorie deficit. And that makes sense in that your body has an energy, it's very sensitive to energy balance. And it has a priority of things it needs to take care of with the energy that you're giving it, basically. And muscle protein synthesis is not on the top of the list. That's also why many women will lose their periods when they're cutting, is because that's something that the body will drop out when it's in an energy deficit. And some women will lose their periods. They're not doing anything wrong. They're in a 20% deficit, 25% maybe, high. Everything is right. It's just I've seen that some women's bodies just don't. They're quick to drop that when they go into an energy deficit. So within 4 weeks they don't have their period, and then they come back. And many women think that's related to fat intake. They need to eat more fat. No, it's energy balance. So just know that. Like, if your fats are way too low, they shouldn't be, just for health reasons. But that's not how you get your period back. You start eating more fats. It's simply when you come back out of that, when you come out of the deficit, you'll find that it'll come back. So back to just muscle protein synthesis. That's what happens is your protein synthesis rates are already lower when you're cutting, and you want to. Again, the idea is, okay, fine, we're not really going to build much muscle when we're in a deficit, but we want to lose as little muscle as possible, ideally none or so little that we can't even tell a difference. And therefore, when you're in that state, things that are increasing protein degradation rates are kind of that goes against that. That's counterproductive, and that would be more conducive to obviously losing muscle over the course of our cut. So, this is the coming back to fasted training. You can counteract that very easily by something like BCAAs, which really it's leucine. That's really what matters. Leucine is an amino acid in protein it stimulates protein synthesis, and it's anti-catabolic. BCAAs in general, I'm not a fan of. That's why I don't have one, and I'll never have one to sell, because otherwise there's no reason. Like, if you're not training fasted, there's no reason to be supplementing with BCAAs. There's I've seen 1 or 2 studies that show that, it is known that the leucine content of a meal determines the amount of protein synthesis that occurs due to it. So that's why, of course, like whey protein is a great protein. One of the reasons why is it's very leucine rich, whereas something like, a plant-based protein, like let's say hemp, is not. So for muscle building purposes, high leucine meals are good. And I've seen a bit of research that shows that the more loose, like if this is kind of coming back to meal frequency, let's say you're eating 6 meals a day, if those are 6 high leucine meals, then that will result in more muscle growth essentially than 6 lower leucine meals, but where you're like adding leucine on top of what would be normally found in the food. But again, that's something where I think it's a bit speculative, and I don't use it to sell anything. Basically, it's just one of those things in the back of my head that I'm curious to see what'll come out of it, maybe over the next several years. So a lot of the research that's used to sell BCAAs is either, in my opinion, you have funding biases, or you have it's poorly designed or poorly executed, or it's taking something in the case of, let's say, fasted training and showing that muscle protein synthesis rates are higher if you have BCAAs before, but not explaining it that way. So I'm just telling people, where let's say you have somebody who's eating plenty of protein, they train fed, that person's not going to benefit from, or it's very unlikely they're going to notice any real benefit from just drinking BCAAs. But when you're training fasted, sure, you want about 2 to 3 grams of leucine. So generally, that's 10 grams or so of BCAAs. The only thing to keep in mind is that leucine, or BCAAs, but leucine particularly, there is an insulin response. It's not as large. So this is relevant for, like, especially with yohimbine. because that's kind of the whole point of fasted training, is that your insulin levels are as low as possible. Ideally, at just completely at the low baseline level that your body naturally maintains when it's done absorbing the food that you ate in your previous meal. But the insulin response to leucine is temporary. If I remember correctly, I remember looking at a paper, it was like 15 minutes or so and it's already dropping off, and it's not as high as like if you were to eat whey protein. Whey protein, for instance, is very insulinogenic. So I used to do BCAAs myself. That's what I'd always do. And this comes back to like me just making kind of products that I myself always wanted. So I wanted a product specifically for fasted training, for cutting when you're fasted training. And better than leucine is something called HMB, which is an acronym for a long type of acid. And basically what it is it's a metabolite of leucine, meaning it's one of the molecules that leucine breaks down into the body. And it was like there was a lot of hype about HMB several years ago, because there was research that was suggesting that in some case, there was like in one case where the results that were shown from HMB supplementation were better than what you could expect from steroids, which is a joke. Obviously, that's a joke. The research was paid for the company that owns the patent on HMB. Big surprise. So there's a lot of bullshit research. Quite a few studies. I've seen probably 5 to 7 that I just dismiss because I'm just like, this is funding biased. I don't believe this at all. But there is good unbiased research that shows HMB is very anti-catabolic, even more so than leucine. And that's what we want. That's what we want for the purpose of counterbalancing the negative effects of fasted training. And HMB has no insulin response, which is cool. And it's about the same, 2.5 grams is what you want. And so I made a product that has that, and it has yohimbine as well, for reasons I already discussed earlier. And it has something called CDP choline, which can help with basically improving focus, because again, when you get adapted to it, you're used to it. But I know a lot of people, when they switch to fasted training, they don't feel as focused on their workouts. They don't feel as like mentally there. They have their attention more on that their body just feels weird, right? So I wanted to create something that kind of increases attention, increases focus, and but more importantly, helps you lose fat faster and counteracts the negative protein degradation effects of fasted training. So for your listeners, if you want to keep it simple is just buy leucine. It tastes terrible, but that's also the most cost-effective way to do it. You can just buy it from bulk powders type of company, and then just have 2 or 3 grams 10-15 minutes before you train, and there you go. If you like BCAAs, and a lot of people drink BCAAs just because they taste good, which I understand. So if you like that, then do that. Or if you want to kind of go all in, then my supplement would be good. If you want to do what I'm talking about, if you want to take yohimbine, then my supplement's gonna be the most cost-effective way to do that, because HMB alone is expensive. I mean, you'd probably pay $20 to $30 for a month's supply of just HMB, because it's very hyped up. Like, I think most recent product was like Clear muscle pill from Muscle Tech or something was HMB. And so they're just expensive. Whereas with mine, you're going to get Forge is the name of it. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Cause I've been looking at some of the supplements on there. I'm probably going to make an order in the next couple of days.
I'll send you some. Just let me know after we do it. Let me know what you want. I'll just send them to you.
Sick, man. Yeah. So, all right. So let's take somebody who wants to, completely sabotage fasted training and completely do it wrong and lose all their muscle mass. What steps would they be taking if they wanted to have a shitty workout, lose their muscle, and just
just have the worst cut ever?
Yeah, exactly.
I would say low protein intake, like under 0.8 grams per pound. So let's say eat 0.5 grams per pound of protein. Low carb intake, which also, I've written about this. One of the benefits of a higher carb diet is that your insulin levels are generally higher. And a lot of people, insulin there's a lot of hate on insulin these days because low carb is the thing. But ironically, insulin, especially for people that want to build muscle and want to build strength, insulin is our friend. I mean, generally, insulin is a great hormone. It shuttles nutrients into cells. It's not something that makes you fat. That's not true. Yes, it does stimulate fat cells to accept glucose. That's true. But your fat cells are going to accept, let's say, dietary fat. They don't need insulin. There's an enzyme your body produces that's why energy balance, coming back to energy balance, if you are in a calorie surplus, I don't care how much of that comes from the healthiest dietary fats you can find, you will get fatter. And even if you have no carbs, even if your insulin levels are as low as they could be at all times, which ironically though, protein is insulinogenic, quite insulinogenic anyway. So, but when your insulin is not an anabolic hormone like testosterone, but it's anti-catabolic, which, coming back to that protein synthesis, protein degradation, it lowers protein breakdown rates. So in that way, it can help you build muscle faster, in that it just creates a more anabolic environment in the body. So when you're cutting, coming back to that, if you, again, this is where we're particularly sensitive to this balance between synthesis and breakdown. By keeping your insulin levels generally higher, you are helping prevent muscle loss. So if you wanted to lose muscle, go very low carb, deplete your muscles of their glycogen and go very high fat and train, and then you're going to have shit workouts. That alone will just give you shit workouts, but that'll also help you lose muscle. And then I would say, be in the gym for long periods of time, cause a lot of muscle damage. So do a lot of sets, a lot of reps, to really place an inordinate demand on the body for repair and recovery. And then don't eat for, let's say, 3 hours, because where breakdown rates really start to spike is after you train. So that's why I generally recommend that after you're done training if you're going to train fasted, at least eat some protein. And if you're not going to, then the little workaround could be have another round of BCAAs or leucine or HMB, and then eat within a couple hours of that. But if you just, train fasted, be in there for 2 hours, beat the shit out of your body, and then don't eat for another 3 or 4 hours. And, don't sleep enough, sleep deprive yourself. That's another good way. And do a bunch of cardio as well. There's another good one. Like, do an hour of cardio a day. Do that fasted as well. And don't. What? Yeah, exactly. Actually, go do an hour of cardio, and then do 2 hours of weightlifting, and then don't eat for 3 or 4 hours. And then, be in too large of a deficit as well. To really try to push it, let's say 40, 50%, or even, I generally, and this is, I've written about this, and there was one study in particular I referenced on this, and that's why I kind of have, and in working with people, I personally kind of draw the line at a 25% deficit. And there's a study that was done with sprinters, I believe, that showed that it was like a 8, 10, maybe 12-week calorie deficit, and you had a group in a 25% deficit. You had a group, and if I remember correctly, maybe a 13, 14% deficit, and then a control group. And the 25% deficit group lost a lot more fat, of course, than the smaller deficit, and very little muscle. So in working with a lot of people too, it seems that that's safe, in that you're not going to lose muscle. You're going to lose fat quickly, which is motivating, and you're going to feel fine as long as you're doing everything else right. So, large deficit would be another way to mess it up. And yeah, I think that's pretty comprehensive.
Yeah. So would you agree that, say, for example, someone was consuming enough protein? So say, for example, at least a gram per pound. They were on a high carb diet, and they felt good training fasted. Would you say that person would be able to build as much muscle or lose as much fat at the same rate as someone who eats before they work out?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think I don't see any reason. They're going to lose fat faster. Again, they will, especially if we're putting supplements into the mix. And building muscle, I don't see any reason why they wouldn't have the same results because if we go back to, like, let's say eating carbs before you train, most people will probably, again, coming back, they will probably notice that they have more energy, especially more muscle endurance in their workouts, and that's relevant. You can get more reps, means you can move up in your weight faster or whatever. But protein before you train, it's not I recommend it. But I would say that's just like again, one of those things where I feel like the research, it's just a gray area. So you might as well, kind of thing. Now, if you've had protein within you know, the last few hours, you don't have to have protein before you train. But if you're waking up first thing in the morning, it makes sense, I think, to have some protein. If you're going to eat carbs, have some protein as well. But eating protein after you train is more important. Again, it's not that it's a super important thing, but it's more important than before. So really all you're looking at in terms of muscle building is, are you stronger and do you have more energy when you eat before you train? And to really know that, you have to give fasted training. You can't just give it 2 weeks. You know, you got to give it, I would say, I mean, for me, I know that I didn't start like really feeling normal in terms of how, because in the beginning, not only did I lose some reps, but everything just felt heavy. I didn't have as much energy. My body had to adapt. I would say it probably took a month or so before I started to feel back to normal. And then within a couple months, I definitely, maybe now, again, I should try it as an experiment, but I don't really think it'd be much of a difference, because just thinking in my head on how, you know, I have energy, I can push through reps. I don't run into any problems now of kind of just running low on glycogen and everything just kind of crapping out. So given that, yeah, I would say that there's nothing to lose with fasted training,
and some to gain if you're on a cut.
Exactly.
Awesome, man. Well, I think we can wrap things up here. What do you think?
Yeah.
Awesome.
No, I mean, that's pretty much everything, right?
All right, cool, man. Well, if someone wants to find your supplements, read your articles, buy your books, just follow you, or maybe, you know, ask you questions, where can they reach you?
Muscleforlife.com is kind of the hub of everything. So that's just muscleforlife.com. And then Legion Athletics is the supplement company. So Legion Athletics, or just put either one into Google, of course, and it'll come up. And the books, I mean, you can buy them on Amazon, anywhere online where you buy books, Amazon, iTunes, Google Books, Barnes & Noble, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, I write a lot of content for both Muscle for Life and Legion. So people listening and just anyone can get a sense for, you know, my work and my philosophies by just checking out. I have a ton of free content up on the website, and both of the websites. And the Legion blog is newer, so obviously Muscle for Life has a lot more. But I definitely am a believer in putting your best stuff out there for free, and really, you know, not just having blog articles be an afterthought, or YouTube videos be an afterthought, but really, you know, try to make the best content as if I were presenting that to a publisher, you know what I mean? As if it were a chapter in a book, because it just creates, you know, that's what people need. You know, there are so many, you know, in my opinion, just underwhelming blogs in this space that they just don't deliver. Either you'll have, coming back to earlier what you were saying on the spectrum here, so you have, like, on the bro science side of the spectrum, you have people that they're poorly written articles. They're not evidence-based at all. They're just, you know, almost stream of consciousness off the top of the head, just because you have to do blogs. I'll put down 1,000 words and call it done. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have very, very well researched, and in some cases well-written articles, but they're so scientific that
Snooze fest.
the layman, you know, in some cases, I even have a hard time understanding sometimes, where I have to read something a few times. I'm like, did I understand that correctly? Oh, okay. So, and I know personally from my experience educating myself, you know, just from what I was talking about in the beginning of the podcast, that's very daunting, when really what the majority of people want is, they would like to know, they like to have, let's say, a good basis in the science and in the ideas and in the principles, but they don't necessarily want to have to, you know, wade through 6,000 words and filled with jargon, and having to go back and forth between dictionaries, and, you know, where they just want to know what they need to do. Like, and so, you know, that's where I try to be in the middle, where I try to make things accessible to anyone. And so where they feel not just that I know what I'm talking about, but they actually understand the mechanisms, the physiological mechanisms in play, and then just what to do.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And the way you're on your website, the way the articles are broken down, it's like you can kind of just skim through and find the answer. You know, you'll see the question, you'll find the answer or whatever. So that's why I don't really share much of other people's stuff on social media, just because there's so much bullshit out there. But recently I have been, and I've been sharing a lot of your stuff, and it seems to get a good response. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to link all of your stuff in the show notes page. That's going to be at musclemonsters.com/EP20. That's EP and the number 20. So you guys can check all that out. I appreciate you for coming on, Mike, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks a lot for having me.